The king stinger ant or Pachycondyla chinensis was from the order Hymenoptera, from the family Formicidae, and from the subfamily Ponerainae. Many must be wondering what the hell ants had to do with stingers. It was simple. These stinger ants had evolved from the same ancestor as bees, which meant that they had retained many characteristics similar to those of bees. In fact, studies on the venom of stinger ants and bees had shown that people who suffered anaphylaxis from stinger ant venom also tended to react in the same way to bee venom. Soryang grabbed the ant with the chopsticks, making it become furious, pointing at it with his finger. And with a smile, our boy mentioned that he didn't believe the ant was targeting Ying specifically. According to him, it had probably appeared to feast on the demon beasts that had invaded the Tang household, revealing that the king stinger demon ant fed mainly on other demonic creatures. After being stung by the ant, one of Peng Muen's men carefully analyzed the sting. The mark looked like a common rash, so then they had no way of knowing what had really stung her. And by the time Ying regained consciousness a few days later, she simply assumed it was a residual spot from something insignificant. Peng Muen's eyes widened in surprise and his jaw dropped. Now everything made sense, and no one would have thought that Ying had collapsed because of such a pathetic and small creature. With a curious expression, he turned to the patriarch and asked if he could make an antidote. The patriarch closed his eyes and began to think. He opened his eyes, which were filled with seriousness, revealing that there was an antidote for bee venom. But cases like Ying's, where the body was highly sensitive to the toxin, often it did not work effectively. Peng Muen's eyes widened in surprise and his jaw dropped. The patriarch made it clear that just knowing the cause was a step forward, since at least now they could be careful before she collapsed again. Peng Muen couldn't help clenching his teeth and feeling furious, but then let out a sigh. He began to observe our boy and with a smile thanked him. Soryang's eyes began to shine with joy and he nodded his head, saying that there was nothing to thank for. With a confident expression, our boy asked Peng Muen not to worry since there was a way to treat Ying and even though it was slow, it existed. Upon hearing this, the patriarchs were in shock. Peng Muen extended his hand and asked Soryang to tell him what it was. Soryang began touching his cheek and with a calm gaze mentioned that it was something called desensitization. Huiyen's attention fixed on our boy. She didn't know what he had in mind. Soryang began to explain himself. Peng Muen's eyes filled with confusion and he asked if they had to undress Ying again. Soryang began to sweat and with a nervous expression explained that it was a treatment where small amounts of bee venom were injected into the patient's body over time, gradually decreasing sensitivity to the toxin, so it was normal that it was going to take some time. With an angry expression, Huiyen was already ready to give Soryang a good lesson. He was sure that once the treatment was complete, Ying would no longer collapse from the venom. The patriarch, with a surprised expression, crossed his arms, realizing that Soryang's method was viable, since even in the Tang clan they had similar techniques. They introduced venom gradually into the body to develop resistance. Peng Muen clenched his fist, asking if once the treatment was over, Ying would no longer collapse. With a smile, the patriarch nodded his head. It was going to take a long time, but it should be possible. Upon hearing this, a pleasant smile appeared on Peng Muen's face. He closed his eyes and patted Soryang on the back, thanking him for having saved his daughter. Our boy started touching his head in embarrassment. The patriarch and Huiyen couldn't help but smile. Peng Muen's eyes began to shine with joy. He grabbed our boy by the shoulders. After receiving such help, there was no way he would simply let it pass, so he asked if there was something that Soryang wanted. Whatever it was, Soryang only had to name it and he would grant it to him. Our boy started to sweat, then closed his eyes and felt somewhat confused, not knowing what was wrong with the people of this world. At the moment he helped them, they began to throw blank checks. With a grateful expression, Soryang greeted Patriarch Peng, saying that Ying was his little sister, so there was no way he could expect a reward in return. Peng Muen started laughing and gave Soryang another pat on the back, explaining that there was no such thing as modesty in the Peng clan, asking our boy to say what he wanted as a reward. The slap was so strong that Soryang began to scream in pain. He knew that if he didn't say something right now, he was going to die. Just then, our boy's eyes widened in surprise. With a joyful gaze and mouth watering, he asked if Peng Muen could join him for a mountain tour. Peng Muen became somewhat confused. The next day, Peng Muen, Soryang, Gupi and Huiyen went to Mount Gongga, which was in Sichuan province. Everyone's attention was fixed on the beautiful waterfall. No one had seen anything so beautiful. With a smile, Peng Muin mentioned that this was a magnificent mountain. Soryang began to laugh, explaining that it was said there was even a beautiful stone cliff. Huyen stepped forward and her attention fixed on the waterfall. With a smile, she admitted that according to the general, this should be the place. With a confident expression, Soryang thought that she was right, since this should be the waterfall and the rock he had mentioned. Our boy felt somewhat confused since he didn't know how they were going to reach the cave that was behind the waterfall. Upon hearing this, Peng Muin turned toward them and an idea came to his mind. With a surprised gaze, he remembered that Soryang had said that he had only recently started learning mobility arts, realizing that he was not familiar with the technique of wave-stepping swallow flight. With a curious expression, our boy asked what that was. At first, Peng Muin began to smile, but then his smile disappeared and his eyes filled with confusion. He grabbed Soryang by the shirt and lifted him into the air. Explaining was painful, so he decided to teach him directly. Our boy's eyes filled with fear, causing him to start sweating, while on the other side, Huyen put her hand over her mouth and couldn't help but go into shock. Using all his strength, Peng Muin threw Soryang toward the waterfall, and upon seeing this, Huyen panicked. Our boy landed near the waterfall, and while he was gasping heavily, Peng Muin also landed in front of him. He put his hands on his waist and started laughing, thinking that he had a pretty agile body. Our boy fell to his knees on the ground, thinking that this guy was crazy. Huyen also arrived at the area and with a worried expression asked if Soryang was okay. She helped Soryang sit down, and when looking forward she realized that this seemed to be the entrance of the cavern. The eyes of our boy filled with surprise since an entrance hidden behind a waterfall was mysterious. The eyes of Peng Muin began to shine with joy. He decided it was time to enter and find out what was inside the cavern. A few minutes later, while the water from the waterfall was falling into the river, Soryang and the others entered the cavern. The eyes of our boy and Huyen widened in surprise, leaving them in shock. With a worried gaze, he admitted that something felt strange. Huyen, who was beside him, began to observe the place and nodded her head. In front of them were small rocks, and on top there were bright crystals, surrounded by dead plants. They knew there was no way that the general had lied. The interior of the cavern was nothing like what they had expected. Soryang sat next to the crystals and began to observe them carefully. This was how Eagle, who, the general of the Miram Alliance, had described it. A ray of light falls in the center of the cavern, and the ground is covered with countless nameless flowers in full bloom. It is mysterious and strange beyond words, like another world, a paradise. Peng Muin and the others began to walk around the area. Our boy's attention was fixed on the dead plants. For him this was like hell, nothing like paradise. Huyen, who was walking behind them, admitted that although light entered through the hole in the ceiling of the cavern, there were no blooming plants. In fact, they all seemed withered and wilted. With a serious gaze, Peng Muin realized that a sacred beast was altering the environment around it. His attention fixed on the rocks, realizing that a cold Kai was radiating from the center rock. With a sincere expression, Soryang admitted that the elder was right. Peng Muin grabbed his sword and asked them to stay behind him. Slowly, Peng Muin began to walk toward the rocks. His eyes began to shine with seriousness, realizing that this was a very serious cold. Just then, a creature let out a powerful roar. Soryang's and Huyen's eyes filled with surprise. Peng Muin's eyes began to shine with seriousness. He unsheathed his sword, revealing that the creature was ahead, asking them to stay just behind him. Soryang's eyes began to shine with joy since for him the roar had been amazing. At that moment, a creature with bright eyes began to emerge from the rocks. It began to stare at our boy and let out another roar. Our boy's eyes widened in surprise and amazement, causing his jaw to drop. The creature was a chubby-tailed gecko. The creature began to walk toward them and its body began to emit a cold Kai. It was approximately 1 foot long. It had small and round yellow eyes and a chubby little tail. Soryang put his hands on his cheeks and his eyes expanded with love. The gecko was so cute that he was about to lose it. Huyen put her hand near her mouth and with a smile admitted that the blue lizard was very beautiful. Our boy clenched his fists and couldn't help but smile, since he knew she was capable of recognizing its value. While on the other side, Peng Muin began to sweat, but then clenched his teeth as he realized something. Then the gecko began to roar. Upon seeing this, Peng Muin tightly grabbed the sword, revealing that there was another gecko deeper inside. Upon noticing there was another one, Soryang couldn't help but wonder if they were pair. Smoke began to emerge from his nose and his eyes widened in surprise when he thought that they could even have offspring out of this. He explained to Lord Peng that they had to bring them back alive no matter what. The gecko started staring at Soryang with a murderous look and cold Kai began to emerge from its body. Deeper within the rocks, there was another gecko that seemed to be injured. With a worried expression, Huion turned to him and asked if there was any problem. Soryong's eyes began to shine with seriousness and his attention fixed on the rocks. He had caught a faint glimmer, but he was sure of one thing. His eyes filled with concern and his gaze fixed on the gecko, revealing that he thought it might not be breathing. The other gecko opened its mouth and began to roar. So, friends, this chapter comes to an end. What will happen next? We'll uncover it in the next chapter. Don't forget to rate this chapter out of 10 in the comments. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care and goodbye. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.